thrown together like this very hasty 3-week prototype. We sat there, we're like, no one's gonna use this, so we like put it on the internet, and like my phone started vibrating a lot, and I just silenced my phone because I was like, this can't be anything important. No one's gonna use our website. What was happening was that it had become the most popular Hacker News story, I think, of all time. Like within an hour, basically, it just like ripped up the charts. Yeah, that ended up being like 200,000 or 300,000 people in the first 3 or 4 days. It had like 3 days worth of data points, and it was like, 0 users, like 50,000 users, 150,000 users, like 300,000 users. It was kind of left to the reader to determine that if we just kept growing this fast, the entire world would be using Codecademy, in 2 months.
The Yesterday podcast is brought to you by Ro, the all-in-one banking platform for startups. Thousands of companies use Ro. You get everything you need to manage your startup's cash. Fast banking setup, cards with up to 2% cashback, and yield that turns your company cash into extra runway. All super useful in the early days of launching. But the thing founders really love about Ro is their team. Candidly, they were amazing to partner with us on. They're about 3 hours ahead of my time zone. I don't think they ever took over 10 minutes to respond back to a text or email of mine. They're obsessed with helping founders beat industry giants, and will go to the end of the earth to help them do so. Exclusively for Yesterday Pod listeners and viewers, you'll get a $1,500 statement credit and tons of exclusive perks when you manage your company cash with Ro. Terms and conditions apply. To learn more, visit ro.co/yesterday. That's rho.co/yesterday. Ro's a fintech, not a bank. Checking and card services provided by Webster Bank. Member FDIC. See rewards terms for details. So if you want to start by just giving a bit of a TLDR on who you are, what you do, and how you spend most of your time now.
I'm Zach. I started a company called Codecademy, which is probably how most people know me. Codecademy taught more than 50 million people around the world technology skills and helped them find jobs. I built that company from 2011 after I dropped out of Columbia until I was there until, I guess, end of 2023 when we sold the company to a company called Skillsoft, and I hung out there for a little bit. And then the last couple of years, I've been doing a bunch of angel investing, advising startups, and figuring out what's next.
I love it. So what did your parents do growing up? What did your grandparents do? What is the story there?
My dad was a commercial real estate broker in New York, so it's pretty conventional. And my mom kind of worked her way up from being folding clothes at the Gap to becoming an executive at clothing companies and kind of helping design shoe brands and clothing companies and apparel.
Do you have siblings?
I do. My sister lives in New York as well and works at a tech company.
Is she older or younger?
Younger.
Nice. And so how old is she compared to you?
She is 4 years younger than me.
4 years younger.
Yeah,
nice. Yeah. And so you grew up outside of New York.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like? What did you spend your time on?
I grew up in Connecticut, so like 45 minutes from the city. It's one of those things. It's close enough that when people don't know, you can say you're from New York, but really I'm from Connecticut. So grew up there, and what did I spend my time on? I think like a whole bunch of different extracurriculars. I did a bunch of cliche stuff, like I was the president of my class at some point. Did a bunch of sports, so I played tennis. I raced skiing. I did crew for like 1 season before I was like, this is really not for me. Other than that, a bunch of really popular kid stuff like mock trial as well.
Bring yourself back to like little Zach. What do you remember doing when you were before high school and before this? Where's your most of your time spent? What did your parents push you to do, if anything?
If anything, I think my parents pushed me to like be curious and kind of follow that curiosity, whether it's reading books, learning more about the world, or just discovering new things. And I think that led me to the internet and like starting companies online when I was young and spending a lot of time realizing that like no one knows how old you are on the internet, so you can do anything.
What's a fun story from there?
I think when I was super young, I guess when I was like 13 or 14, the iPod came out, and I got an iPod, I think for my birthday or something like that one year, and there were no waterproof cases, and so I like emailed all the companies that I thought should have been making waterproof cases for iPods, offering to like help them create one. Finally got on the phone with a company that was like, we're willing to work with you, you can be a consultant, you can help design this like first waterproof iPod case, like what's your consulting rate? And I was like 13, I was like, oh, it's just gonna cost $200. And they were like, oh, $200 an hour? Or like, what's $200 a day? Like what's the rate? And I said, just $200 flat. And my like voice cracked in the middle of this phone call. And I think that's when they were like, are you, like, how old are you? And I was like, don't ask that question. So I think I had that moment a lot where I'd like get on the phone with people. I'd like send these emails that were, you're obviously familiar with the cold email. I would send these cold emails. People would respond to them. We'd like negotiate something, and then we'd get on the phone, and then like my voice would crack in the middle of a phone call, and it would just be like game over for me. Yeah, I never got to using like a voice modulator, but I probably should have.
I did this when I was a kid. I tried to start a business. I got on the phone with the guy, and he heard my voice. And at the end of the call, he's like, "So great to chat." And he called me buddy, and I was like, "Fuck, I messed this up." I was like, "Fuck." He thinks I'm like 12. That was good. And so, did most of your friends do this, or
No.
were you kind of outlier?
I think kind of definitely an outlier. I think most of my friends were, we had like school and we were doing, 15 and 16-year-old stuff. And I was not, or maybe I guess I was doing a bunch of the same stuff that everyone else was doing, but on the side was also, starting businesses online, doing e-commerce stuff, and yeah, kind of just like exploring what the internet had for me.
What else did you explore?
I sold like after the waterproof iPod thing. I started selling iPod cases on the internet, so I was like importing these like silicone iPod cases from China. And then reselling them in the US.
You were 15, 16?
Yeah, I think like 13 or 14. And at one point, my parents were like, "Why do we keep getting these like really large boxes, and why do you keep asking to be driven to the post office?" And I kind of had to explain like, "Well, I'm just like buying these like in bulk, and then I'm sending them to people across the country who are interested in buying them." And my parents were like, "What? How are you doing this? How?" And then I think after that I started, I had all kinds of different ideas, and I would write these business plans for my parents and ask them, theoretically for their blessing, and maybe once or twice for, a couple $100 to like fund something. But it was one of those like little red paperclip stories of, I started I think with like $50 or $100, and I like bought a few of these iPod cases and then sold a bunch more, and then next thing you knew I was like doing tens of thousands of dollars a year in revenue on an eBay store, and building out I guess like pre-Shopify. I guess it was like a Joomla instance that was selling all these iPod cases. Yeah.
What was the hardest part of your childhood, if anything, that sticks out?
Honestly, I feel like I had a pretty great childhood. I think this is, a lot of people like look for trauma. Yeah. My parents are amazing. Like I'm still in touch with them like almost every day. My sister's great. If anything, I feel like I grew up with somewhat of like an immigrant mentality because my great-grandparents, fled the pogroms in Russia and Poland in the end of the 1800s. Came here and like started from zero. And so my great grandfather like bottled ketchup in a Heinz ketchup factory and like, started doing that. And then over time, like became an accountant. And it was kind of like always passed down in our family that like, it was like less than 100 years ago that like basically everyone in Russia, and Poland were, trying to kick out people that believed in a certain thing and, were religious and like it could happen again, and so you should be thankful for kind of what you have every day and make the most of it. And I think like I look back at one of the things that drives me, and I think it's like my ancestors, fled persecution, came to America, like bottled ketchup, so that I could do whatever I want on a regular basis, and like I should do something that counts and matters. And I think that's kind of driven a lot of how I spend my time, and what one of the things that helped me start Codecademy was like anyone. Whether you are bottling the ketchup, whether you come from a really privileged background, should be able to achieve what they want to if they put the time in. Mm-hmm. And I think that was kind of always a thing in my childhood too.
What did you want to do when you were in high school? I guess you obviously went to Columbia, which you can touch on, but what were you really excited in?
I think it depended on the year. I think, there was a brief politics phase. I think there was a brief, like, I want to be a lawyer phase. But I think like the most abiding thing after I started all these things on the internet was like to do something on the internet. When I was 17 or 18, I wrote for this blog called Rev2 that was basically like or I guess it coexisted at the same time as TechCrunch coexisted. It's actually a funny story. I wrote for this guy. I had no idea who it was. I found him on the internet. I cold emailed him and I said, "Love to write for you. I have some ideas." He, had me. I did actually what essentially was an early version of a podcast back then, and I interviewed a bunch of people. Like Aaron Levie when they launched Box, like a bunch of people when they launched like the early versions of the of Facebook Marketplace apps. I think I interviewed Dave Morin way back in the day when they were launching Facebook Connect. And the biggest thing again to me was just like, wow, I'm 15 or 16, like in a room, and I'm talking to these people that are like doing real things in the world, but who aren't that much older than me, and who seem capable of like launching companies, taking them public, and that to me was like a real wow moment. And I think that's kind of what convinced me, like, I should probably go start a technology company eventually. And so to follow through on that dream, I ended up applying to Stanford and immediately got rejected. Early decision. But maybe just to bring the whole story full circle, the founder of Rev2 in later years, who, again, we both were like, not pseudonymous, I mean, we had real names, but this guy, Sid, later emailed me like 6 or 7 years later and was in New York, and he was like, "Oh, by the way, I moved to New York from New Zealand where he lived, and I work at Teachable, which is another education technology company, and we met each other for the first time and like became friends. And it turns out he, I think, is even maybe like a year younger than me. And now he started and runs this community company called Circle. You may have heard of, yeah. And so yeah, very, very like full circle. You know, nobody knows who you are on the internet. We both were like, don't tell anyone we're 15. And then like 10 years later, met each other in person, and now like I'm an investor in Circle. He's a friend. It's yeah.
That's nice. And so you applied to Stanford. Where else did you apply? And did you want to go to Columbia, or kind of you just ended up there?
I think I applied a bunch of different places. I didn't have a really clear idea of what I wanted, other than I think the Stanford thing was very clearly like, I want to start a company. Silicon Valley's the center of everything. I have to be here. And other than that, I wasn't that passionate about any other place to go. I ended up going to Columbia, as you said, and I liked my time at Columbia. I think Columbia is much more city-oriented, which fits for me. I love New York. Obviously, we're here now. And a lot less campus oriented. So I think there's like not a ton of like Columbia pride. I remember going to like a Yale football game and everyone's like drinking and singing like for God, for country, and for Yale. And at Columbia, it's like, classes would be over and everyone would like come downtown, and go eat and drink and like go to museums and like leave campus immediately. So it's much less of a like tight-knit experience.
Makes sense. What did you study?
I studied political science and economics.
And this is, I guess, by virtue of mock trials in high school?
By virtue of?
Mock trials?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I thought, like, what better way to kind of like understand the world and the systems that run the world than understanding, political science and economics. And then I guess the real kind of crucible moment for me was also wanting to make things on the internet. And so I was working on the student newspaper with my friend Ryan at the time, and I was teaching myself to program. And I kind of like dabbled a little bit in high school, and I dabbled a little bit in college. But this is the moment where I was like, I'm gonna, we want to start selling ads on the college newspaper. Ryan was the like CTO of the newspaper. I don't remember what my position was, but like I'm gonna learn to program as well, and we're gonna fix the newspaper. And I found it just like immensely frustrating. I took 1004 at Columbia, which was like the introductory computer science class. And it was just like a total weeder, you're all gonna fail this class. And I think that was the moment where I was like, oh, I think I'm probably like in the wrong major. Like I should, I'm super interested in like technology and computer science and programming. But the way that we're teaching this here is just like so arcane and like annoying and wants to like weed people out.
Was your sister also this deep into tech? I know now she works at a tech company. Or what was the dynamic there?
She was not. My sister, I think, got into tech 2 or 3 years after she graduated from college. She became a designer. But it wasn't like from day one interest the same way it was for me.
Makes sense. And so touch on the relationship with Ryan and how that eventually turned into Code Academy. You're just kind of at this blog newspaper stuff, doing whatever is interesting and curious, but how does this evolve into, okay, I'm going to start this company?
Yeah, I think the two of us, I think we met on The Spectator, which is a newspaper, and just kind of worked together on a bunch of projects. And then eventually Ryan started with someone else, and I don't think I was a co-founder of Memory Serves, but it was kind of around the edges helpful. This thing called the Application Development Initiative at Columbia that was basically like, I don't know, today you'd have like an MIT Hacks or something like that. It was like hackathons plus like classes. And so, I was kind of the typical non-technical student at the time who wanted to learn like, they weren't teaching like Ruby or Python in class. They were teaching Java, and I was working at tech startups on the nights and weekends, and was like, none of the things that we're learning in computer science class are like applicable to these. Why can't we teach people real meaningful skills? So we started these like boot camps. We'd have classes nights and weekends for people to teach them things from zero, like how do you learn Ruby, how do you learn Python, how do you learn JavaScript. And then hackathons to have people kind of build those things together. And so I think that experience of working with Ryan, of like trying to get sponsorships for that, trying to like talk to professors, trying to talk to companies to figure out like what skills do they need in order to give kids from Columbia jobs. I think it was kind of the first moment Ryan and I really started melding and working together.
What do you think Ryan is best at in contrast to you?
Ryan's one of the smartest people I've met. I think very frameworked, very diligent, and I think at getting something off the ground, like Ryan was extremely quick and very hacky.
Interesting. And so, touch on this kind of early story to when you get into YC and what was going on at Columbia. You're kind of the student. It's quite taboo, I would say, at that point to drop out, which you eventually did. Yeah. Touch on that story and touch a bit more on what your parents thought of all this stuff.
So I guess we'll back up for a second. My freshman summer, I Worked at a startup. So I originally, you go to Columbia, and I guess now big tech is this, but at Columbia in 2008, it was, finance and consulting. And so, the Goldman Sachs CEO comes to campus, the McKinsey CEO comes to campus, and they kind of pay for this expensive food spread, and hundreds of students go, and they tell you like your life's gonna be so amazing if you go join one of these finance or consulting firms. So I kind of almost fell for that my freshman year. It's not really the year you get these internships, but I kind of wavered in doing that. And then I went to an information session or not information session, it was an event by like the Columbia Organization of Entrepreneurs or something like that, with this guy, Sam Lessin, who, since...
Of Slow Ventures?
Of Slow Ventures,
Oh, no
correct. Way. Who back then had started a startup in Dumbo. I think might have been the only company along with Hot Potato in Dumbo at the time, called Dropio. And I went to go see Sam talk, and if I remember correctly, there were like 2 people there. I thought there were gonna be like hundreds of people in the audience to see Sam, but as you said, in 2008, there were no, like, working in a tech company was taboo. Nobody really cared. So I was just like entranced by this idea again of Sam seems super smart. He was in his early 20s. He was running a company. How could I like go work with him?
Did he go to Columbia?
He did not. He went to Harvard.
I see. So he came to recruit, or what was that?
Yeah, I think he just came, like, they were in, companies in Dumbo, and so I think he came to recruit and just like talk about what he was working on. I saw that experience and I was like, I must go work at Dropio. And I think I bothered Sam like 700 times, over email. I think I like started randomly showing up at the coffee shop, like right outside the Dropio office, just to like bump into Sam, until eventually kind of he relented and was like, okay, fine, you can hang out here for the summer. And that again was this experience of like, oh, there's 20 people in a room like working really hard on something. Even my first experience working at a startup, realizing like, oh, I might want to do this. And so I think I had that experience. The next summer, I wanted to work in venture capital, and so I met someone at Dropio that introduced me to someone who also went to Columbia, who's now a good friend, this guy Mike Brown, who at the time was running AOL's venture capital arm.
Didn't they invest in Code Academy?
They did not invest in Code Academy.
Did you work out of their office? Or...
I worked there that summer. And at AOL Ventures. This was like right after Tim Armstrong. This is like ancient lore. This is like 12, 13 years ago. But Tim Armstrong came back, like tried to revitalize AOL. The biggest move was lowercasing the logo. And I think adding a period if memory serves. So it was like AOL. And Mike was investing in startups. It was, I think, a $30 million fund or off balance sheet. And it was my first exposure to, again, like we're meeting lots of entrepreneurs, high velocity. And this is so interesting. Like I should, find a way to go start a company or to invest eventually. And so I think I had that experience. And then finally, one of the companies that came in and pitched us at AOL was a company called GroupMe. And
they were also Columbia guys, right?
Correct. Nice. Jared, one of the founders, is a Columbia guy, and they came in and pitched us. And I think AOL ultimately passed, but I, got close with Steve and Jared, who started the company. And they had incorporated, they raised money relatively immediately, and then I just started working with them, nights and weekends, and then kind of the internship ended, and I was kind of full-time-ish. And it was the 2 of them and 1 or 2 other people, like in Steve's apartment, on Park Avenue and 26th Street or something like that. And another one of these experiences of like, these guys are like 24. They started GroupMe, like hundreds of thousands of people were using GroupMe like relatively instantaneously. They were doing these deals with music festivals. Like they raised money from Ron Conway and a bunch of other, kind of at the time, very storied Silicon Valley investors. And so I think I had kind of experience after experience of like, wow, tech companies are awesome. I should go do that eventually.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What was the next time you had this feeling? Was it when you started Code Academy? There was this other instance where it's like, okay, I'm this younger guy in a room with people who are doing interesting things, and now I've realized I can do the same.
Yeah, I think each of these was like resetting my own kind of understanding of what could be accomplished. And I think with Code Academy, I made the decision, Steve and Jared asked me to drop out of college. It was the beginning of my junior year, like right after they started GroupMe. And I said, I'm not sure, like I'm ready for this yet. But I still want to work here. So I was still there a few days a week. And then December of that year, again, it was the end of the first semester, they were like, you should drop out.
This is again. Junior year, first semester.
Correct, junior year, first semester. Okay. And they were like, you finish your first semester, don't go back in January, drop out, like things are ripping. I thought about it again. I spoke to my parents, you asked earlier about that. My parents are amazing. They were like, look, no time in your life will you ever have, the ability to tolerate risk basically as much as you do now. And worst case, you like go work at GroupMe for a year and like it doesn't work and you go back to college and it's fine. So I thought a lot about that and ultimately decided if I was going to drop out or take a leave of absence, I would, take a chance on myself instead of someone else. And so I went back to campus, told the GroupMe guys, like, would still love to work here a few days a week, but it's probably not going to work full time. Went back to campus and I talked to Ryan and I said, hey, I think we have like this magical opportunity. He's a year older than me. So he was dropping, he was going to graduate that year. And I said, we should start working together on a bunch of stuff. Who knows what it becomes, but like we work well together. We have complementary skill sets. We basically have 6 months of like risk-free time to experiment and build different things. And like, if we build a company, that's great. And if we don't, like, you'll graduate and go get a job and like, I'll go be a senior in college. So it was like pretty risk-free.
Uh-huh. Interesting. And so what's the origin story there? How did you actually end up then on Codecademy if you're experiencing all this stuff?
We had a bunch of friends that were recruiting at the time, and a bunch of companies didn't recruit on campus at Columbia. And so the two of us said, like, oh, why does like McKinsey not come, or Bain or whoever it was come recruit, and why isn't Google recruiting engineers at Columbia's campus? What if we had a like petition-based way of helping students, demand effectively that these companies come recruit on campus? And so we built this thing called Come Recruit Us at a hackathon, really talented with names. Where like 100 college juniors at Columbia could say, like, if Google came to campus, like we would interview, basically eliminating the demand issue for them. Of course, it's like a truly horrible idea. Like the employers didn't care. Not that many students really cared either, and it never really went anywhere. But I think the thing that it did was kind of cement this working relationship with Ryan and I, of like, oh, the two of us can work together on something, hard, nights, weekends, during the day, skip classes, whatever we need to do. And we just kind of need to cycle in order to find the right idea. And I think that was like a big moment for the two of us in realizing like this might not be the right idea, but we really enjoy each other.
What year was this?
2011.
And you also went to YC that year. And so,
Correct,
So
yeah.
when did you now decide Codecademy is the thing? When did you first create the first version of it, and then the YC? How'd that happen?
It happened the other way around. So we applied to YC with a different idea. So we applied to YC with originally with the Come Recruit Us idea. Somehow they saw a shade of brilliance in there somewhere, where basically they told us, you two seem great. Maybe you should have a different idea. Was the initial feedback on the application, and like you should. They did a video screening interview, and that was, I think it was Alexis at the time. That's what he said. Like
Alexis Ohanian?
Alexis Ohanian, yeah. You two are great. This idea is not that great, but you should come and like formally interview.
Interesting.
So we went back to the drawing board and we spoke to like hundreds of different employers, a bunch of students, and ultimately decided, what a really big problem is how do you connect high quality talent that might not go to a place like Columbia or Harvard or MIT, but has pure tech skills and can write code and is a 10x engineer. How do you find those people and connect them to great technology companies? So we built, in order to get into YC, we built this thing kind of frantically in 2 or 3 weeks that basically was similar to, today exists as a company called HackerRank, these challenges and puzzles, or LeetCode, the challenges and puzzles people could do online for free, and, based on how they scored on those, could eventually get paired up with employers in order to find a job. So that was the idea. We flew out to San Francisco after we got our YC interview. I think we stayed, I don't remember, it was either the CTO or something like that's house of Airbnb. We booked it on Airbnb. We had no idea whose house it was. And then we locked ourselves out of the house.
No way.
And this is the beginning of Airbnb. So we're on the phone with Airbnb support, which existed for 3 hours a day.
Just Brian on the phone.
Yeah, and they were like, oh, sorry, it's our CTO's house and he's in the Philippines for a few months, so we're not sure how to get the keys. It's just a very weird experience.
Who's the CTO? There's Joe, Brian, who's the other one?
And Nate, yeah. I don't remember. I've met Nate a few times after that, and I don't think we ever related the story. I don't know for certain if it was Nate. So it was some early Airbnb employee. Yeah. And we did our interview, and these YC interviews are 10 minutes, super short. And PG was entranced by this idea at the time because I think it was the perfect YC company. On the one hand, you have these unbelievable companies that are all hiring engineers. On the other hand, you have lots of engineers who want to go work at YC companies. And so if you join YC, we could have been kind of the interchange in the middle of both of those. So I think the interview went super great. We went back to Palo Alto to have pizza. And I remember standing in front of Pizza My Heart on University Avenue in Palo Alto, and my phone rang, and PG was it's YC, you got in. See you in a month.
That's a good spot.
Yeah.
I was at Pizza My Heart maybe a few weeks ago.
Yeah. I don't think I've been back, but every time I walk by, I'm
yeah. I don't think the pizza's that good, but it's an iconic
Warren's
spot.
is the real Palo Alto
spot.
spot.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I love it. And you spend time in SF now, right? Or Palo Alto, SF. Where do you spend?
SF.
Nice.
Yeah.
Where do you stay in the city?
We have a house near Dolores Park.
Nice. Is that the Painted Ladies one?
It is not.
No.
I think that's Alamo Square.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool. You got into YC. And who was your mentor? Was it PG or Alexis?
They didn't have mentors
Oh.
back then. Yeah.
How big was your batch?
We were 64 companies, which at the time I think was like one of the biggest YC batches that had existed, and the beginning of the Start Fund, and so it was like Yuri Milner and SV Angel, were giving $150,000. There were 64 companies. The press at the time was like, how can Y Combinator manage 64 companies at the same time?
Wait, what is that story? You said SV Angel was giving money? There wasn't a YC fund?
There was not. So YC gave like $17,000 to every company. I may mess the details up here, but
Yeah.
I think YC gave $17,000 to every company, and then you were guaranteed $150,000 on top
another
of that
venture firm.
from Yuri Milner and SV Angel. Each contributed like $75,000 to every company.
Did YC get economics in that, or YC
don't
only
know.
got the 7? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what the perk was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so there's a story that when you launched Code Academy, you had X amount of thousands of users in the first week, 2 weeks. What did that feel like, and what was this? Where were you? Dig into that story.
Once we got into YC, we didn't have the idea for Code Academy. So before the launch, there was a bunch of kind of in the desert moments of we're going to try a whole bunch of different ideas. We realized that another company in our batch had basically the same idea, the company HackerRank I mentioned earlier.
And they were in your batch?
They were in our batch,
interesting.
yeah. They were working on something marginally different, Interview Street at the time. And kind of over time, we realized we were just like getting closer and closer to each other. And Ryan and I were just not that into the recruiting market. And so I think we kind of 3 or 4 weeks before demo day, PG kept asking us, and Sam Altman kept asking us, what are your biggest problems? Mm-hmm. And our biggest problems were that I was not a good engineer, and I'd taken one intro to computer science class. I'd learned a bunch on my own, but I was watching these MIT OpenCourseware videos at the time of here's like a camera in the back of an MIT class to learn computer science, and I had a bunch of O'Reilly books, and my desk looked like 17 energy drinks and O'Reilly books, and me watching these videos. It was just so annoying. And we realized that our biggest, we'd started working on things together to help people that had skills find jobs and increase employment. And I was living proof of this issue, which was I was trying to learn the skills I needed to find jobs, and I couldn't, and I found it really, really difficult. And the only thing, it kind of kept realizing that Ryan and I were just doing this at Columbia. We had run classes for non-technical people to start learning to program and to eventually find jobs. And I was the consumer. And in this case, it again occurred to us it's the same thing again. Ryan is sitting there teaching me to program. We should this is the biggest problem that we have right now. And so we kind of had that light bulb moment in the middle of the summer, and formally pivoted to launching Code Academy. And that was 3 or 4 weeks before demo day. And at that point in the summer, we thought we were pretty screwed, I think. We were how are we going to do anything? Every other company in our batch was we're going to launch next week. We're expecting 10 million users in the first week. We've been working on this for 3 years. We have lots of revenue. You show up to every YC dinner, and everyone looks at you, and we were we just started writing code on our new thing now. Hopefully it goes well.
Who else was in that batch? HackerRank, you.
HackerRank, us, Firebase, who else? Science Exchange, SIF Science, Segment, Rap Genius.
Rap, is that with the yellow?
Yeah.
They were YC.
Yeah, they were very hot for a few years. Yeah.
What is their business model?
I don't know. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think they're all long gone from that business. I don't know if they sold it or what happened.
Oh wow. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, talk about where just the users skyrocketed and becoming this actual CEO of a company. How did you get your first hire? Who was it? What was that process?
So we, it was right before YC, right before demo day, we'd thrown together this very hasty, 3-week, 3-week prototype that basically had one lesson on JavaScript. And so you could go on the website. Something that was very cool back in the day was we put a terminal on the homepage. You kind of converse with the terminal, and you give it your name, and there was an hour's worth of content on the site, and then that was it. There's no recurring use case. And we kind of were deciding, okay, should we launch with this, or should we, should we launch with this, or should we try to build out more content? And ultimately decided, well, kind of Hail Mary. It's 3 or 4 days before demo day, we got to figure this out. Otherwise, we're going to go up there and be we built this thing that teaches you to code. No one uses it. So we decided to launch. I remember showing it to, I think, Gary at the time, who was the design partner at YC back in the day. This is, I think, right after he stopped working on Postgres. And he was oh, you should be embarrassed when you launch the first version of your product, but you shouldn't be this embarrassed because this product is not great. So we didn't get resoundingly positive feedback from people. And Ryan and I kind of sat there and realized oh, well, I guess it's kind of now or never. So the two of us, again, 3 or 4 days before demo day, if memory serves, had kind of a YOLO moment. We sat there, we're like, no one's gonna use this. So we like put it on the internet. I posted it on Hacker News. It was like show Hacker News, Codecademy, the easiest way to learn to code. Yeah, exactly. It was a show HN. And the two of us went to go get bagels. Like we were living in Sunnyvale at the time. Went to go get bagels. We assumed like no one's gonna use this. I installed Chartbeat, which I don't know if that's still around, but Chartbeat basically was like real-time analytics. And like my phone started vibrating a lot when we were like at the bagel restaurant. And I just silenced my phone because I was like, this can't be anything important. No one's gonna use our website. And then like people started calling me in our batch and they were like, are you seeing this? And I had turned my phone, on silence basically. And so, what was happening was that it had become the most popular Hacker News story, I think, of all time. Like within an hour, basically, it just like ripped up the charts. Lots of people were using it. The site was like struggling to stay up. So Ryan and I like, went all the way home, called a bunch of people in our batch who, came over and tried to help us fight the strain, keep servers up. And yeah, that ended up being like 200,000 or 300,000 people in the first 3 or 4 days. And then we like rode that right into demo day. And we got to say, I think at the time we were like the fastest growing consumer YC company of all time.
Who'd you raise from?
We raised from USV, Thrive, SV Angel, Yuri Milner, like a whole bunch of people.
What year was this?
2011.
When was Thrive started?
This was Thrive 1, so I think it was like a $10 million fund.
OG Thrive.
Yeah, so
nice.
it was OG Thrive.
Was it with Josh or Miles?
It was with Josh and Chris Pake, yeah.
Nice, and Chris
and
at
Will,
Pace now.
yeah, Gabriel,
nice.
yeah.
And Will's at Stripe?
Will is at Stripe,
Nice, that's a good story.
Yeah.
Nice. What was that fundraise like? How much did you raise?
We raised 2.5. We called it a Series A because we're the only company in our YC batch that did a priced round. Yeah. So everyone else was doing these like uncapped notes or totally crazy convertible notes. This was before YC had like invented the safe. And so we did a price round 2.5, I think, on 12, which at the time felt very rich. And I think was not the hardest fundraise. I think kind of what happened was the YC deck was, it had like 3 days worth of data points, and it was like, 0 users, like 50,000 users, 150,000 users, like 300,000 users. And it was kind of left to the reader to determine that if we just kept growing this fast, the entire world would be using Codecademy, in 2 months. And so I think because of that, like the story was really good. Mark Andreessen had just written Software is Eating the World. I think that was very much part of our narrative, was like, okay, software's eating the world. Everybody's going to need to be a software engineer and a software developer. How do we get more people to have that skill set? And the answer is Codecademy. We're going to give it to everyone for free. And by the way, it's working and it's growing really fast.
How did you retain people? Because I guess when you started, it was this terminal and an hour's worth of content. What do you make right after?
We didn't retain people. I think this was like the biggest kind of cause and source of urgency early on for us was this fact that we knew that we had the leakiest bucket of all time because we had one piece of course content on the site, and as soon as you finished it, there would be nothing else for you to do. So the biggest thing was like we were signing people up over email. They were creating a login, they were registering, and the hope was like we would race to create content after that. And I think that's kind of what the next like couple of months was us trying as fast as possible to generate as much content as we possibly could. And I think if you talk to any education company, they will tell you that content is a bane of your existence. And that was so difficult. It was like the two of us, it was just the two of us. We were like trying to recruit people during the day, writing code at night, sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, and just like rinse and repeat 7 days a week. And I think it's even worse when you have hundreds of thousands of users who every day are emailing you and basically saying like, is there more content? And then we had a bunch of clones that popped up too. Like we had one investor who who we had said no to, who then like launched his own competitive company, like directly in competition with us. Very weird. I remember getting this email from Paul Graham that basically said, congratulations, like you think you have accomplished what you need to accomplish because you raised your Series A, but this is the moment of greatest peril. Like now is when like the market knows that you have a great opportunity, and everyone's moving really quickly to capture it, and just because you raise money doesn't mean it's over. And I think that kind of encouraged us again to just work like 100 hours a week to try to like make more content, hire people, make the site better.
Who's your first hire?
So we hired 2 people, I think, on the same day. One of them was this guy Lang, who I'd known. I like went on a summer program a few years earlier, and he was the instructor on the summer program. He's a data scientist, and he'd worked in education before. So we hired him as kind of the all-around ops person, and he's gone on to start a few great companies since then too. And then the other person that joined is Amjad, who since has gone on to start Replit.
Yeah, wow.
And Amjad we worked with from an early on in the company's history. Replit was an open source project at the time, and so we built part of the initial version of Codecademy on top of that Replit open source project because it was the kind of in-browser code editor for us. and then worked with him as a consultant for a while until like one day we were having trouble hiring people, and Ryan and I were like, well, I guess Zach should go to Jordan and like try to hire Amjad. And so I like got on a plane and went to Amman and spent like 4 or 5 days with Amjad, and basically was like, I'm just not gonna leave until you come work with us.
And so, how old is Amjad at this point?
I don't remember. I think like
Is he's
early,
younger than you?
I think he's a little bit older than me. I think
Okay.
early to mid 20s.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then did you scale faster, or what was this process like?
Employees, we probably were like 10 or 15 people in the first year, but we were totally free. So I think the big either mistake or maybe it was smart, but for the first 4 years of the business, we were thankful to our venture capital overlords. We're totally free, growing really quickly. This was the days of USV. I think pioneered this like large networks of engaged users. So we had millions of people learning on Codecademy, but no revenue because all the products were totally free. So we did grow super quickly in terms of user count. We grew super quickly in terms of the amount of content on the site. Headcount we always kept pretty small, so like 15 to 30 people for the first few years of the company. But we also did a whole bunch of government partnerships. So part of what we did in those first 4 years was like really focus on distribution. And we did partnerships with the UK where we helped, they put computer science as a mandatory requirement for all their schools. So we helped kind of make that happen, helped write the curriculum there, and do the same thing in countries like Brazil, France, Argentina, a whole bunch of other countries. Really kind of focusing on like, if more people in the world are learning computer science and programming, eventually more people will use Codecademy, and there will be higher employment, and we'll have a more tech-based, ecosystem.
You wrote this blog in January of this year. There's only one blog or post on your site. It's about the broader idea that distribution matters much more now. And there's this one point in the article where you said people who had large Twitter followings before, like, there's no way they started a real company. Now maybe it's possible. Celebrities are good examples of this. Touch on the contrast there, where you had this first mover advantage, great product and great distribution, and how that kind of was a moat, and then maybe how that contrasts now.
When we started the company, we thought of distribution as important as I think it is today, but we thought about it differently. In our case, I think we need to build a movement, and so we built this movement around everyone needs to learn to code. Coding is the literacy of the 21st century. We did this in a few different ways. We had a writer, this guy Douglas Rushkoff, who'd written a book called Program or Be Programmed. Rushkoff was kind of a thought leader at the time, and helped us kind of get this message out there. And then number two is we did a bunch of kind of competitive dynamic things around the world. So we launched this program called Code Year, as an example, in 2012. And we asked people to make their New Year's resolution be to learn to program. I think at some point like 500,000 people or more pledged to make that their New Year's resolution. And as part of that, we got a lot of like countries and cities competing with each other. At the time, Mike Bloomberg, who was the mayor of New York, tweeted out like, learn to code is my New Year's resolution. And then Boris Johnson, who was the mayor of London at the time, also said like, my New Year's resolution is to learn to program, and like I'll learn to program better than Mike Bloomberg. And so this kind of happened, and it was like, wow, we're turning programming into this real moment where people appreciate that it's not just for nerds, it's a thing that everyone in the economy needs to do. And then I think that as a result helped us a bunch of media as well. Like I did the Colbert Report, we were on a bunch of the morning shows, because we needed I think we need to manufacture demand a little bit for programming skills. And so I think that still is true today. Like I think you see a lot of people, try to create movements. Like I think Anduril's done an amazing job of like making, defense sexy again. Where 5 years ago, like no one wanted to work at Lockheed, or no one wanted to work at Boeing or something like that.
So was this kind of that moment for Codecademy where you had this mystique around it? It was growing.
Yeah, I think that moment was like all these media appearances. We did. We spoke at the World Economic Forum a few times, and like a bunch of presidents were like, "How can I teach my entire population to program?" So it felt like we kind of created this meme that was pretty amazing at the time. And that was super helpful and the meme was like, everyone needs to learn to program, but also the number one way they should learn to program is with Codecademy. And so it was kind of both of those things, rising tide lifts all boats.
And who are these competitors? What happened to them? Did they ever get close, or just nothing there?
I think you had purely coding focused companies, most of whom didn't really get close. A few of them raised, tens of millions of dollars. You have companies like Treehouse, that raised a bunch of money and then it didn't go anywhere. And then a bunch of kind of STEM specific companies like Udacity, which raised a few $100 million and competed, I think, with us, but also was a little bit broader of a mandate and sold, I think, a couple years ago.
When did what's it called, Udemy?
Udemy, yes. Yeah, Udemy, I think, again, very broad, a public company today. Coursera, a public company today. I think, the different strategy that those companies took as opposed to us was we're going to teach you everything, basically. And I think for us, we just decided like we're going to be laser focused on programming, data science, and over time, as AI became more popular, we'll teach you AI, we'll teach you how to understand crypto. But it's really all focused on like technology, because those are the most important jobs of the 21st century.
How did you sort of batch these courses? I've like done some of the Code Academy stuff. They're very methodical and very thought through. And there's this point in time where you're teaching something that you might not even know yourself very well. Maybe Ryan knows it super well. How do you actually structure that to eventually have a user who knows nothing about coding take this course and you'd be relatively proficient to some degree?
A lot of really capable educators, I think, is the answer. I would say like building the technology behind Code Academy was difficult, but I think building the content was like by far the bigger challenge. And again, I think if you talk to anybody who runs an education company, like this is constantly the thing. I think the two biggest things are like good for you is not good business really. And so like we were trying to teach people programming and there was no, you didn't have to sit down and be in one place all the time. And so I think that was one uphill battle, which is just getting people to like follow through with something they want to do. But I think the other thing that's very challenging is this, like, how do you create hundreds of hours of really high quality content that builds on each other? And originally we thought, oh, we're gonna build a marketplace model like a Udemy, and we're just gonna let anybody create courses and post them online. I think the mistake we made there was assuming that people would do it for free. We thought like, oh, people comment on Reddit, they comment on Twitter, they do whatever. They'll create courses. People are not creating courses. And so we moved to this model of like, we are going to create everything. And over time, when we sold the company, I want to say we had 40, 50 people on a content team in-house managing hundreds of freelancers around the world. They were all creating content for us.
And you weren't charging at this point when you said you went out, right? So that's why you couldn't kind of have people come and create their own thing.
Correct, yeah. We were not charging early on. We still built a content team from pretty early, 10, 15 people, in order to just generate lots of content. And then we, over time, figured out how to scale it to contractors. We also worked with a lot of companies, so we like taught people to use certain APIs, and in those cases, we worked with the developer experience teams at those companies where like Stripe would teach you to use the Stripe API early on, and be someone creating the course from Stripe, Twilio, similar kind of thing.
What are some of the early stories that most people don't know about Code Academy? I think this YC story is interesting. The story about growing and the Code Year stuff is cool, but what's some stuff that most people just haven't heard of?
One of our longest tenured engineer, at one point, I want to say it was like 6 or 9 months into the company, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a couple years into the company, we were like doing this huge migration, and basically like deleted all the production databases for the company with like all the users and all the course data. For like 24 hours, we were unaware of if there were backups anywhere. It was less than 24 hours. It was probably 2 or 3 hours. But there was this moment where we thought, like, oops, we like deleted the company. And fortunately, like, look, we follow all sorts of best practices and we had backups and we figured everything out. But like, I think we lost like 24, 36 hours worth of data. Okay. But during that time, like, we kind of thought the entire company was going to go away.
When was this? How many users did you have?
I think like several million users. Yeah. I think it was just like, we were doing a huge, like a whole redesign of the site. We were pushing a major change and like a new engineer had like not onboarded correctly and like fat fingered something and like, oops. So that was really stressful. I remember sitting around like working on that with everyone for 24, 36 hours not sleeping, and thinking like the company could go away because we did something really stupid.
Was there a point in time where something sort of surprised you in terms of hiring, or I don't know. I think when you're a kid, especially in college, you had this world in which you were close to people doing the thing, and then you were the one doing the thing. Is there some contrast that surprised you from being kind of in the room to now being the person?
I guess a really big moment was maybe like realizing that nobody really knows. And this is super cliche, but I remember like in the early days of the company, I kind of consistently felt like I don't know what I'm doing, it seems to be working, but like I still don't know what I'm doing, and how can I figure out how to appear like I know what I'm doing so that nobody knows, which is I think kind of first time founder imposter syndrome. And actually one of our employees early on came up to me and said like, hey, I just want to let you know, we all know. And I was like, what do you know? And he said, we all know you have no idea what you're doing every day. And this is like my worst nightmare, because he said, he said you don't need to stand up in all hands and say like, oh, the numbers were down this week, but they're down for this exact reason, and like I know exactly what we're gonna do, and like everything's gonna be fine. And instead, he said, what matters more, and I think this is totally true, is telling people that you don't have all the answers, being open and honest with them. And at the time, it's like I thought I needed to be like brash and 100% confident all the time and appear to have all the answers. And I think that works if you do have all the answers and people around you believe you. But in my case, I ultimately ended up standing in front of the company and being like, look, there are things I don't know, and that's why the rest of you are here, is so that we can like all figure them out together. And I think that really colored a lot of the culture from that point forward of like, it's okay not to know, as long as you admit that you don't know something, and then you go solve that problem very quickly. And you can, hire someone to solve the problem, hire a consultant, do the homework yourself. But what's not acceptable is to not know something and not share that with everyone else inside the company. And I think we were hiring a lot of these like mega high slope, fast learners. And I think that was like a big unlock because it made it okay for everyone to help each other much more than like live on their own island.
How did you get good at managing people? And what was the structure? I feel like how many direct reports did you have? How many people were below them? How did you manage the people below them? And kind of like, how do you end up running a really big organization and actually making sure it flows, where at the top you're still figuring things out and everybody else is figuring things out and this somehow pieces together into an organization that has done well? What's like the learning there?
I think one of the big differentiators for me early on also was learning the difference between like management and leadership. And I think one of the things as the CEO that you have the unique opportunity to do is to be the leader. And that's like, Fred Wilson wrote this great blog post 10 or 15 years ago. The 3 jobs of the CEO are to, set vision and strategy, hire great people, and give them everything they need to be successful, which oftentimes is like raise the money for them. And that's really like it. That's your job as a CEO. And I think like first and foremost, that's what you have to do. You can always hire other people to do the managing, but you can like never slip up on those 3 things. When it came time to learning to manage, I was very bad at this at the beginning. We'd never, I just kind of thought we would hire smart people and be like, go fix that problem. And that would be fine. Like I didn't know what a one-on-one was. And I think, Dick Costolo, who was running Twitter at the time, had done this like managing at Twitter course that he taught everyone at Twitter. And one of our investors, Square Ventures, had a CEO session with Dick for 8 hours on like, here's how Dick runs Twitter. And it was this like totally revelatory moment for me of, oh, like you should have, this was 6 months into the company, but it was like, oh, you should have direct like meetings with your direct reports, like once a week, once every other week. Like you should see how their projects are going. Whereas I think early on, I just thought like, oh, we're going to hire really smart people. We're going to say we need to grow the user base, 20% this month, like figure it out. And instead, it turns out there's a lot more to good management than that. I feel like this stuff is also like ebbed and flowed with time though. I think if you talk to any CEO, they will tell you that the most draining part is like one-on-ones and regularly scheduled meetings. And so I think all this stuff that was taken as like, what is a good manager 10 years ago has changed a lot now. I think if you go back and you look at like, what is Brian Chesky talking about with founder mode? What are a lot of these people saying? They're saying that like, you are allowed as a founder to get your hands dirty and do the work. You don't have to have regularly scheduled meetings with everyone every week. And I think towards the end of the company, right before we sold the company, that was kind of the direction I'd moved in as well, which is like, okay, we're big enough now. We're like 350, 400 when we sold the company. We're big enough at this point that I have extremely competent executives. We have like OKRs that are broken down on a quarter by quarter basis. Monthly goals, like demo days where people are expected to demo things, and like the company kind of has a cadence and it's running itself. And if you need me, we don't have to have like an hour every week to do a one-on-one. Like we can ad hoc speak to each other about something. But that requires this like much more built out, system of goals and company cadence and whatnot.
What was the point in time where you think you kind of make this decision of, okay, I want to try to IPO this company, or I'm going to get acquired and move on? And kind of move on from this whole thing you spent a decade on? What was that moment in time where you made that decision?
So I always wanted to take the company public. I should start there. For some reason, I thought like the pinnacle of achievement is running a public company, which if you speak to most public company CEOs, they will tell you you should never want this. But I think what I kept realizing was education is an extremely challenging market. With the exception of Duolingo, which has built an unbelievable business, and I think you can go back and forth on whether it's a game or an education company, there are almost no really big outcomes in education. I think if you look at, it's been a few months since I've looked, but the market caps of Udemy and Coursera between $1 billion and $2 billion. Chegg during the pandemic was a $10 or $12 billion company, and today I think is like a couple $100 million. Your old line publishers, similar thing, $4, $5, $6 billion. Like there just aren't very many big companies in education. And so I think at one point I had this realization of like, we are playing, maybe a baseball, like, Major League Baseball, but in like the single A league, if you will, where no matter how good of a company we build in this space, it is inherently capped from an outcome perspective by the space. And I think I felt this acutely in 2021. The company's profitable. probably 35, 40 million revenue, growing 100% year over year, profitable, and we started getting inbound emails to raise money. And I had a bunch of friends that were running SaaS companies, like burning tons of cash, 2 million in ARR, 1 million in ARR. They're raising money at $1 billion, $1.5 billion, $2 billion valuations. And, we had a business doing 30 or $40 million, growing 2x year over year, profitable. And investors were like, we think this thing is like maybe worth 275 or 300. Because of it was a real lesson about like the quality of revenue you could have as a company. We were mostly consumer, only had a little bit of B2B at that point. So we're mostly consumer business, which, much lower multiples. And people would just look at the comps and say like, this is just not gonna be that big. Yeah. And I think that fundraise was like a real awakening for me of, okay, we've kind of scaled the business to this point now where it's growing. We could take it to 100 million in revenue. Like, what is that worth? You have, at that point in time, everyone commonly said, you take the company to 100 million revenue, you take it public. Mm-hmm. But okay, if we were getting like sub 10x multiples on our revenue, and it was going to take us 3-4 more years to get the company to 100 million in revenue, what was that going to be worth? Mm-hmm. And then from a quality of revenue perspective, I think if you look at Coursera and Udemy today, and this is a transition we were in the process of making, is we were moving to become a B2B company. And so we had started to do that. We had a few $1 million in B2B revenue. It was growing super fast. But in order to take the company public, we were going to have to take B2B to 100 million revenue too. So, and if you look at how Coursera and Udemy IPO'd, this is kind of what the formula was like we have a big, couple $100 million consumer revenue business and a rapidly scaling, much more retentive B2B subscription business. And that's why you should invest in the company. Like the future is in B2B. And so I think I looked at that landscape and in mid 2021 and said, it's going to take us 3 to 4 years to take consumer to 100 million in revenue, and we're going to have to build this B2B business. And that's like building an entirely separate business inside of the company. And that's going to take another 5 to 7 years. So it wasn't at that moment that I said like, we should sell the company. It was just realizing like, what is it going to take to get this company public? 5 to 7 more years of work, basically building an entirely new go-to-market. And so, we should be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. And how old were you it was 21 when you got acquired?
It was 22 when we got acquired. Yeah, I was 32, yeah.
Gotcha. And so what did you think through that point where you kind of sell this company and you have X amount of more decades to do meaningful work and, do more stuff? How do you think about, okay, I'm going to sell this and what do I do next? Now you angel invest that. Now you've done some stuff. But in that moment, what did you think you would do? And kind of contrast to now, what excites you?
In late 2021, I had, Skillsoft, who's our eventual acquirer, and 3 or 4 other companies basically within 3 or 4 days reach out and say, would you be interested in a conversation?
Why did they all, why that?
I have no idea, but it was like, I don't believe in this kind of stuff. But if you were to believe in signs, it was a sign. Yeah. I was taking like a 3 or 4 day vacation with my parents, and I just got these emails like one after another. I was like, would you be interested in talking about a deeper partnership? And I think everyone knows what that means. Mm-hmm. And I, talked to my board, and we all thought the business was going great. At that point, we were at 55-ish million in revenue, again, kind of growing 100% year over year. The B2B business was starting to take off, still profitable, like 50 million in the bank. But, we said, like maybe there's something here we should see. We had raised around at like close to 300 million, and I think the ultimate, decision to make was, could we get a lot more than that afterwards? And I think. So we basically chased down those 4 companies that were interested, and over time realized like, maybe we're going to get credit in an acquisition process for 2 to 3 more years of building, and we should consider that. And the other thing I think that was pretty salient around the same time was realizing, basically there's this massive gulf between companies that sell for between $500 and $600 million and go public. And this is like maybe the last stop on the train before the only choice we have is to go public. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of, ultimately what we ended up deciding to do was something that felt at the time like the best of all worlds, which was, we selling the company Skillsoft, and basically the conclusion, Skillsoft had just gone public, big B2B education company. They were going to acquire us. I was going to run a third of their business, which is kind of a $250, $300 million line of business, 900 employees, with the plan over time for basically the company to look a lot more like Codecademy, and maybe over time for me to run like the entire company. So when we sold the company, I think the vision was, okay, there's a path here for me to run a public company, which is what I wanted, and for it to have the spirit and soul of Codecademy.
Yeah, and then why'd you leave Skillsoft?
Yeah. I think a lot of people experience this when they sell a company. You have this, no matter how much you have buy-in from the acquirer, in Skillsoft's case, it was a close to 3,000 employee company acquiring, a 350, 400 person company, and it's just with extremely different DNA. And I think early on, it was very obvious to us that the difference between a culture that has like 99th percentile compensation engineers in like New York and San Francisco and like is a hot tech startup, with a company that had previously been owned by private equity. Most engineering was offshore, and was in other areas in the U.S. that were not New York and San Francisco. Like really hard to mesh those two cultures, and I think that over time just like made it very difficult to integrate the two things, very difficult to like turn the 3,000 person ship. And I also think at the time, when Skillsoft bought Codecademy, it was, that we signed the papers end of 2021, we closed the deal mid 2022. It was like the heyday of, when we signed the deal, the heyday of, grow fast and don't worry about EBITDA. And then, the Ukraine war happened and the market tanked in 2022. And everybody started caring about EBITDA again. And so the initial thought was like Skillsoft would buy us. We would focus on, being a very fast growth company. We wouldn't necessarily need to be profitable immediately. And then the market turned and basically was like, actually, every public company needs to be profitable immediately. And so I think we were kind of a victim of all of those trends happening at once.
So. And touch on the exact moment. How much did you get acquired for? What was it like for you and Ryan? And then, what was it like right after? Was there any difference or you felt the same?
So the company got acquired for, the headline number was $525 million. We had $50 million in cash on the balance sheet. So the total amount to shareholders was $575. I expected to feel a lot more than I did. I think the biggest thing is you realize these things are slow. So we signed the term sheet like early October 2021. I'm going to script the dates here. We signed the term sheet early October 2021. The deal almost fell apart in December when we were like supposed to announce it on an earnings call. There were just a bunch of like last minute things where, at one point the deal was off and then it was back on and then so what everyone always says about like these things aren't done until like the ink is dry. So we ended up signing, I think like December 23rd. It was like a day or two before Christmas. I had COVID. I was like holed up in my New York apartment. It was like truly terrible. And you think it's over when you like sign the final documents. And we made the announcement to Wall Street and our team. But then you go through like 4 months where, at the time we needed what's called HSR, which is Hart-Scott-Rodino, which is a government thing for any acquisition over $500 million. You need governmental approval. And then they need to do a proxy vote for their shareholders. There was this like a 4-month period again of like total uncertainty where the government could be like, just kidding, you can't sell the company. And so I was like, that was among the most stressful periods of the company because, you tell your team like you're about to be acquired for a lot of money. And they keep saying, oh, well, what does like our new overlord want us to do? And I'm like, well, I can't talk to them until this deal is closed. So we're just going to keep running the business independently. And then finally the deal closed and I expected to have this like magic moment of like, wow, everything feels so much better, or like, I'm going to look at my bank account and it's going to feel wonderful. And I didn't. And I think this is like, typical of many like achievement-oriented people is, I had built this moment up. I was like, wow, the, deal's going to close. I'm going to like refresh my bank account. The wire's going to hit and it's going to be like this unbelievable feeling. And I remember, I don't even know why, I was in like an Amtrak train from like a conference or something to LA for the weekend. And I like refreshed my computer and like I saw this money in my bank account. I like got the final documents, DocuSign from everyone. And it was like the deal's closed on Monday. You're going to like be a Skillsoft employee. And I just like didn't feel that much. I just felt like I need to like accomplish more, which I think is like a common thing amongst I think people that start companies. And I would say the biggest difference is maybe before we sold the company, a lot of our employees were like, Zach's like, I guess this changed as I got older, but much less experienced than me. I'm like a 35, 37-year-old marketing executive. I have a lot of experience in marketing. Like, why am I going to listen to like a 25-year-old CEO who doesn't know what he's doing? And then I think the minute we sold the company, like any perceived doubts about my competence were like thrown out the window, which is just a very funny about face where like in meetings beforehand, people would like feel free to challenge me and like have a contrary opinion. And then the minute we sold the company, everyone was like, whatever you say, sir, like we'll do it. We'll get right on it. Which is funny. It's like nothing changed between those, those time periods, but.
are you the type of person who went and bought a bunch of cars or traveled a bunch,
No.
or did you just get right back to work?
I got right back to work. I think the common advice that like everybody who sold the company told me is buy one thing, if anything, and then don't spend any money for the entirety of a year. I don't even think I really bought anything over the course of that year. I got back to work. Like, oh, actually, you know what I did? I was living basically out of a suitcase with my fiance at the time, who was living in San Francisco, and I was living in New York, and I was back and forth between New York and San Francisco, and we were basically living in Airbnbs for a month at a time. And so as soon as we signed the deal, I was like, okay, I should probably rent an apartment. So I rented an apartment in New York. There's nothing crazy, but that was the one thing where I was like, okay, I should feel rooted now.
Nice. I love it. And what caused the move here again? I must have asked you this, but it was just
This particular
yeah,
apartment?
just
Or,
bigger space, or
we signed a 14-month lease in the previous apartment,
Okay,
and the
cool.
landlord
Nice.
moved back in. Yeah.
nice. Oh, nice. Well, cool. Touch on present day. You spend time angel investing. Your blog with the one post.
One blog post,
It
yeah,
says
exactly.
figuring out what's next.
Yeah.
It might be messing up the phrasing.
Yep.
What is next for you? What excites you? And I think there's this trope of people who sell companies and then want to become investors. I think some have done it phenomenally well, some have not. That's one option.
Yep.
Another option where you're getting married soon,
Yep.
and we can talk about that as well. You just focus on your family, or you start another company. What really excites you?
I think some flavor of doing it again excites me. I think if I've learned anything from taking time off, it's that taking time off is not the rest of my life. So I think the focus on the family thing, I want to be a great member of my family, but I don't think that's going to be the entirety of my time. I've looked into both things. Like you mentioned, I'm an angel investor in 65, 70 companies at this point. Spent a lot of last year meeting great companies, making angel investments, advising those companies, and kind of being a part of them from the sidelines.
What's your average check size?
Usually like 50K, 25K. Yeah, it depends on the company. I've written much bigger checks for, if someone's a close friend as well. And I think I might be the only person out there who's not investing on behalf of a scout fund right now. It's actually just my money. And sometimes it works. I'm an investor in Mercury, an investor in Row, in Replit, a few others, and then spending time advising companies, and then looking into maybe starting a company of my own. So I've kind of explored ideas with a few people, and then also explored ideas like you mentioned for a fund with a few folks. So kind of all over the map, just trying to see what's interesting and what could be. The first 12-year journey was Codecademy. I want to do something that I think is even bigger and better than that. And to your point on, how did I feel when I sold the company? And the answer was not much. I'm still convinced that if I build something bigger and better, that feeling will be there. So I gotta, keep going until I capture that.
What pulls you the most? What excites you the most? What would really pulls you if you had to, first think of something?
This is gonna be the most cliche thing ever, but it's I spend a lot of time building, stuff with Claude Code and OpenAI Codex, and it's, I started a company to teach people programming. And it seems like very soon, programming will just be English. And I'm not sure if I'm as much of a believer that everyone's gonna be coding up their own to-do app and building their own SaaS. But I do think it's amazing, as a person who does build software, to be able to do it 5 to 10 times faster. So I think that's pretty amazing. And I spent a lot of time just making, side projects. I also think I've spent a bunch of time on what is the infrastructure behind AI. So going deep in learning a lot more about the power markets, the minerals world, what's going to happen. We're going to build data centers that wrap around the sun. How are we going to do all these things?
CoreWeave will do it.
Exactly, CoreWeave will do it. Nebius will do it. Yeah. So I think understanding what the world will look like 5 to 10 years from now is, to me, among the most interesting things to do. And I think oftentimes in venture specifically, and a lot of the current day tech discourse, I think we're just caught up in AI will make it easier for you to call a car dealership and get your thing done. But it's if you kind of follow a lot of this stuff through to its logical extreme, who knows if a lot of these smaller companies will exist, and we might live in a world that looks extremely different from how it does today.
Makes sense. This is a common question that Patrick O'Shaughnessy asks, who I mentioned, I think does a great job. What's the kindest thing somebody's done for you? And I have a few questions as well, but I always like this question.
My parents being unfailingly supportive to me when I dropped out, when I considered starting a company. I think so many people when I taught, who have dropped out of college or whatever, have talked to their parents, and their parents are you have to finish, you have to finish 4 years, you have to be a doctor, you have to do whatever. I think I was so lucky that I grew up with parents who wanted me to be myself. And
what do you think that was?
I think it, and
especially back then.
yeah, and it was never about achievement. It was always about like we just want you to be happy. And I was the one who put all the pressure on myself all the time. I think as a result, though, they always were, they pushed me to like do whatever I wanted to do, and I think that meant when it came time to drop out of college, they weren't like, we spent all this money sending you to Columbia, and like you have to finish. They were like, you know what? Like if this something you really believe in, like you should go do what you believe in. And I think that's kind of every time I've faced like a major decision in life, I think that's kind of the same advice. And it's an unbelievable kindness, I guess, to have people in your corner that are like always and unfailingly in your corner, no matter what you do. And I'm lucky that I have, I have a best friend that's that way, and now I have a fiance that's that way, and I have a sister that's that way. But like, that's, I think the ultimate kindness is like people who help you believe in yourself.
How did you meet your fiance? What's the story there?
I was living in a house in Hawaii during COVID.
Oh, wow.
For about a month with like 10 other tech entrepreneurs. My fiance Maddie came to hang out with Max, who was living in the house for 2 or 3 days. We met each other. She was living in San Francisco. I was living in Miami at the time, like outside of the Hawaii part. And we were like, we'll never date each other. We live on opposite sides of the country. 2 entrepreneurs dating each other is silly. And then like somehow through sheer force of will, we kept seeing each other.
I love it.
And here we are.
And how excited are you for next week?
Excited.
Next weekend, I guess, when you get married.
Very excited.
When are you, how does it work? Are you spending like 4 days there and prior, setting up, and what's the plan?
That's kind of it. Yeah, we're
Nice.
there. We go next Tuesday or Wednesday. There for like 3 or 4 days. Haven't booked a honeymoon yet, so we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Nice. This is again like one of these broader questions, and they're hard to answer. I like asking this question because somebody asked me this and I couldn't answer it. So it's fine. It's fine if you can't. But if there's a book about your life, what would the title be and why? I've asked most of my interviewers this. It's a common question that this PE firm called Alpine likes to ask in their interviews.
I feel like anything here is chintzy, but let's go ahead with like learning to live, which I think is like, I just think everything in life for me has been focused on learning, right? Like I taught people, taught 50 million people with Codecademy, had to learn a bunch myself in order to do that. And I think this is just kind of like the secret to anyone who's been successful is like, the way you kind of keep living and having an impact is by learning a lot. And I feel like that'll kind of ultimately, hopefully be my story too, is kind of this voracious, quest for knowledge, hopefully applied to a way to make a lot better in the world for a lot of people. Like I think with Codecademy, it was how can we help, hundreds of millions of people, find better jobs and live a better future. And I think hopefully with whatever my next chapter is too, will be a similar kind of extension of opportunity to, many more people and to help them live better lives too.